Me llamo Dan Kurzrock, soy de California, y mi español es el mismo de los niños. So I'm gonna speak in English. Let me know if you need me to slow down. I know there's some translation services in the back. Hope everyone had a great lunch, and it's just a pleasure to be with you here today. So I am here to talk to you about what I think is one of the largest opportunities in food system innovation. I started a company called ReGrained, and I'm going to tell you a bit more about it. At a high level, what we're doing is we are working with rescuing edible and nutritious byproducts and doing something that we call upcycling with them. So instead of having them go to lower uses, turning them into food that can make really tasty, really versatile superfoods. Our mission is to better align the food we eat with the planet we love. And we're really focused on waste innovation. I'm going to talk to you a bit more about this. I think it is one of the single largest opportunities to create a more sustainable, a more regenerative, a more prosperous food system. And we got our start with beer, and I'll tell you more about that. But there's lots of opportunities to do this in Puerto Rico and all over the world. And my goal in sharing our story and some of my ideas with you is to hopefully inspire some of the entrepreneurs in the room to take some action, because there's a lot that can be done, and it's a good way to not only align the food we eat with the planet we love, but also create more vibrant food economies. Let's talk about food waste. So worldwide, more than a third of all food that is grown is wasted, right? So we grow lots of food, but a lot of it ends up like this. So that's the equivalent of you going to the grocery store, filling up 3 bags with groceries, walking back and leaving and just dropping one of them in the parking lot and saying, okay, no problem. We only need 2 of the 3 bags that we bought, right? So it's a huge problem, because growing food takes a lot of resources. About a fifth of all the fresh water in the world is going to grow food that's never consumed, right? When it goes to landfill, food waste actually turns into greenhouse gases. It breaks down into methane, which is more than 20 times worse than carbon dioxide. So if you picture food waste as a nation in itself, it would be the 3rd largest emitter, like a contributor to global warming as a country. So it'd be like China, the US, and then food waste as a country. Right? So there's a lot of this. When I learned about food waste, I was, of course, shocked about all this, but even more shocked by realizing that actually a huge part of the problem isn't even measured. For me, that meant beer waste. Does anyone here drink beer? Wow, yeah, most people drink beer, right? And when you medalla, yes. And when you think of beer waste, you might be thinking of the wounded soldiers that are left the day after a party, right? But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm going to just make a little quiz out of this. Beer has 4 ingredients traditionally. There's 4 ingredients. Just shout them if you know them. Hops, yeast, barley, water. You guys are a smart crowd. Very good. Yes. Very, very simple traditional process of brewing beer. And the grain, the malt, the cebado that is used in beer making, it's actually only needed for the sugar. So the beer makers take the sugar from the grain, leaving behind all of the protein, all of the fiber. And today, a lot of it goes to landfill, a lot of it goes to feed animals. And I'll tell you our story of how we kind of stumbled into finding a better use for this, which I think offers a really nice analog for other opportunities of looking at things that might have historically been seen as byproducts or as waste, where there might be hidden value that can be captured through entrepreneurship. So in the States, the drinking age is 21, right? Boo. Made more complicated by the fact that you go to college, so you leave home for the first time at 18, right? And so I was an 18-year-old college student that couldn't buy beer, and so I learned how to make it. My mother was thrilled, very proud, right? And what I discovered is that every time I made a batch of beer, I would be using a lot of grain. This is actually my beer brewing equipment here on your right. And I would be using about a pound of grain for every 6-pack of beer, right? So every time I would make a batch, that'd be 20 pounds, 30 pounds, depends on how strong the beer is. And I liked very fuerte cerveza in college. So devised a scheme. I thought, okay, I like making beer, but I'm a broke college student. I can't sell my beer, that's very illegal, but I'm making this food every time I make beer, and I'm just supposed to throw this away? No, that seems silly. So devised a scheme to make bread out of the grain that I'd already used to make beer, which I would then sell to my friends so that I could then brew beer for free. I wasn't really out to save the world at the time. It was pretty self-interested, but it made a lot of sense. I already told you about that. One kind of crazy thing to note about, we talk about resources that it takes to grow the food. Like beer is an agricultural crop, right? And actually 90% of the water footprint of beer is in the barley supply chain. It takes to grow the barley, malt the barley, and every 6-pack, it's the equivalent of the water that you would take if you took a 2-hour shower, right? I mean, that's a lot of resources to then just not do anything with it afterwards. This photo I took on the right, well, I took both these photos, but the one on the right is outside of one brewery, one single brewery in one single day. There's, scientifically, there's shitloads of this stuff. So, what is it? Is it waste? No, it's very high in protein, it's very high in fiber, and so we set out to do something about it. With food, there's a hierarchy that we should be following as a society. This is called the food recovery hierarchy that you're seeing there. Obviously, going to landfill is the lowest possible use. Above that, there's composting, energy, feeding animals. But at the very top is feeding people, right? It makes sense. That's why having a plant-based diet is also more sustainable, because we're keeping most of the resources at the top of the food chain instead of feeding plants to animals, which we then eat, right? So we call this model upcycling because it's all about making sure that we are valuing the resources that support all life on our planet and making sure that they go to the highest possible use. We knew that we had a real idea, but we identified a big problem. Nobody knew what this stuff was. The industry calls it spent grain. You may as well call it garbage grain, right? Like if it's spent, it has no value. But it has a lot of value. We just knew that we needed to teach people about it. So our vision has always been to be an ingredient company, and I'll talk more about that. But in order to help build the market, which is missing for this ingredient, we launched a brand. And in that brand, we launched our first product set, which is a line of nutrition bars. We distribute them kind of all over the US right now, mostly on the West Coast. And we've got some other snacks that are coming out soon. And our retail brand is designed so that we can teach the world that this stuff is not only good for the planet, but that it's also delicious, and it's nutritious, and it's fun, and it can power an active, healthy lifestyle. What I get really excited about is the versatility of this. These are all photos of some of the items that we've made with this flour that we create, this upcycled flour. And what our vision is to bring this model of production all over the world, everywhere that beer is brewed and food is made, create a new source of superfood ingredients that we can work with manufacturers in those countries to create new products. And so you can kind of think of us, if your computer might be, Intel inside, we want to create a food system that is powered by ReGrained and by upcycled ingredients. Zooming out, what we're trying to do is really shift the food system from being something that is linear, right? So the traditional model of production, unfortunately, has become take, make, waste, right? It starts on one end, it ends on the other, and we don't think about it after that. We want to move to a circular economy where outputs can equal inputs, right? If you think about nature, in nature there is no waste. A tree in the forest dies, it falls over, and then that becomes a nurse log to foster new life, right? So how can we apply that very old system of, very old, very intuitive system of thinking to food. That's really what we're all about. And in this next section, I hope it gives you some ideas of other examples of what, the kind of the ReGrained way, the upcycling way, how that can be applied, here in Puerto Rico and all over. And the challenge to keep in mind is that what we're dealing with in a lot of cases here is what I like to call a missing market. So we have all this supply, right? We have all these potential ingredients, and we have the people that are creating those ingredients that would love to sell them. And then we have, on the demand side, you've got food manufacturers. Most of the big ones are losing market share. They're very, very interested in ways to create better tasting, better products that are better for people and better for the planet, right? Using an ingredient that's upcycled is a great way to achieve those outcomes. However, the two don't talk to each other. And so that's where we see the opportunity to come in and help connect the dots and put the pieces together to create this more circular food system. So one of the things that we had to do was create a new way of processing the grain, which is fairly technical, and I won't get into much here. Happy to talk about it more later. But to take this supply, we had to create a very energy efficient way, which we filed a patent around to basically dry it out so that we could make the flour. No one had really figured out how to do that before, because if you think of it as the missing market, they didn't know where they would sell it, right? So they weren't making the investments in order to do that. And then it's on the demand side. So if consumers, and now it's been reported that more than 2/3 of consumers will pay more for a product. Nearly 70% say that they will pay more for a product if it's better for the planet. But when you're marketing something that was waste, so you want them to feel that they're making the impact, right? But you also don't want to yuck their yum. So you want them to be excited about what you're doing, but in the messaging, it's, you have to kind of think about ways, and that's why we're so excited about upcycling. Think about ways in which we focus on the good and not make people think that they're going to be diving into a dumpster for their food, because that's of course not what we're talking about, right? So there's this kind of interesting dynamic of wanting to make sure that they know that they're doing something really great, but also making sure that we're still marketing this as food and as the delicious food that it is. With upcycling, it sees waste as a resource. So waste is money. Waste is opportunity, right? We do not need to have waste in our food system. Some other examples. In dairy processing, the main byproduct is called whey. Many of you are likely familiar with whey. They've done a very good job of marketing whey as a human food ingredient, especially protein powders, things like that. This is an analog that we look to, where we want to see, okay, this worked with whey, where else can we apply it? Also a very old idea, the idea of using a whole animal. There's a brand called Epic in the States that you may have seen. It's kind of vertically integrated. They use every part of the animal, and they have products that are marketed for each of those segments, right? So it's about using everything. You guys grow some coffee in this country, I understand, correct? Is anyone familiar with cascara? Yeah, not enough, right? Coffee is a fruit. We know the bean. It's wrapped in a cherry. That cherry has nutrition. It has functional properties for food production. We actually, in one of our product lines, we use it as an ingredient. So this is a way for coffee farmers, and you can also use the coffee leaf as well. There's ways to create value streams out of these additional co-products that maybe historically have rotted in a pile at the farm. Cacao. You guys grow cacao here, right? Yeah. As I understand, some excellent cacao. Cacao is also a fruit, and there's the juice. There's a company, I only know of one company right now that is taking cacao juice and making an ingredient out of it. Maybe they can come here and work with some of you on this, but or you can just do it. It's an amazing opportunity to create two products where historically we've only had one product. Juice, everyone drinks juice, right? What's left over after juice? Pulp. Also a bad name. We need to rename pulp. We're working on that. There's a company in the US called Forager. They're a juice company. They use their own pulp to create a line of chips. So they make the juice and they make the chips. The chips are actually so successful that they started having to source pulp from other juice makers. That's amazing, right? It's a big opportunity. Bread. one of my favorite examples. They're kind of our brother from another mother. There's a company called Toast. So bread is one of the single largest wasted streams that comes out of especially retail bakeries. It's very hard to do inventory planning around bread, and the next day it's not fresh bread anymore, right? So this company has found a way to use bread actually as a substitute for malt in beer to create that full circle. So we want to work with, so if you think about it, what they're doing is they're rescuing bread that can't be eaten, and there's not enough demand for croutons and breadcrumbs and such. There's a lot of wasted bread, and using that as an input to make beer. And so what we're going to do, of course, is we're going to team up with them, and then we'll take that grain from the beer and we'll make more bread, and then they'll turn that back into more beer, and then that'll make more bread, and then that'll turn back into more. You see where I'm going with this? Perpetual motion machine for business. We get really excited thinking about these kinds of things. So where are there other opportunities to create value-added products out of byproducts? I'm going to be here all day. I would love to brainstorm about this. We're looking to use ReGrained as a platform to talk about and promote upcycling and help create more circular food systems to do that. And what I want to leave you guys with, and maybe we'll have time for a question or two, is just some food for thought of my experience starting this business. As you remember, I started when I was an underage home brewer. That was more than 10 years ago, and steadily worked towards this being a full-time business, with investors and distribution and employees. And I've learned some things along the way. One of the most important ones, I think, is that nobody knows anything. Don't be afraid if you don't feel like you know anything, because nobody does. We're all just figuring it out. The most important thing that we ever did was take action on our ideas, which is a segue into point number 2. My favorite definition of innovation, which I know this conference is here to help promote. Innovation is putting creativity in action. To do that, you have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to be willing to take 2 steps forward, to take 1 step back. There's a certain risk tolerance that it takes, but you know what? Nothing's going to happen if you don't take any steps, right? So why not try something? For us, very much, I don't know, hopefully you guys were here to see Lisa talk about Kuli earlier, amazing company. Just like her, one of the first things we ever did was we just started making these products and trying to sell them to friends and collect feedback. We didn't know if anyone other than our mothers and cousins would buy them. We didn't know until we actually tried it. It can be very daunting because you're told to build a business model and a pitch deck and get an MBA, and it doesn't have to be that complicated. I actually have an MBA. It was a great experience, but one of the most important things that I learned from one of my mentors there was the expression that's in number 4, that models are tools. So what I learned was that all models are wrong, some are useful, right? So all models are wrong, some are useful. You're not going to actually know how things will go until you try them, and you're going to have to change your plans anyway. So don't obsess over perfection, because that will get in the way of progress, right? So it's about putting your ideas into action. And to do that, it's also incredibly important to be humble and to admit that nobody knows anything and ask for help. People want to help other people. I have so many people that I have asked along the way what I thought were some of the dumbest questions in the world, and they've gone out of their way to help, support us building something, because if you're trying to build something that's meaningful, you know what? Other people want to see that become a reality too. And you don't need to know everything. The most important job for me as a CEO, in my opinion, other than making sure that we don't run out of money, is hiring the right people that are better at what they do than what I could do, than I would be at their jobs, right? So that is so incredibly important, and it takes, you got to put your ego aside. You're not expected to know everything. So in conclusion, I wish I had a really snappy, conclusive sentence for you. Have your beer and eat it too. I've used that one before though, so not original. I know Puerto Rico's in a really challenging moment right now, and it can be seen as a turning point to build a more regenerative food system, and it can be a model for what a more prosperous, more sustainable food system can be for the rest of the world. And I think that this is one of many innovations, hopefully, that can serve as some inspiration for that. And I just you know, I'm rooting for everybody here and want to do everything that we can to support you. So thank you so much for having me here. Amazing country, amazing people, and talk to you all later. Cheers.